Good evening. We're living in historic times. Events that are happening now are not going to just shape today, tomorrow, but the entire future. Every one of us senses it. Whether it's events in the different countries around the world, leaderships in crisis, but especially, which is close to our hearts, the Middle East, Israel, the Jewish people. So as chairman of the Allgemeiner, I feel especially honored that we are part of making history. Because it's times like this that define who's standing up for moral clarity amidst all the confusion, for values that we all cherish, that are the foundations and the basis of all civilization. That's the time we're in. Literally every day, different breaking news, the uncertainties, nothing surprises us. So I'd like to share with you all that you are all part of this history. They say there are three types of people: people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. All of you right here and the Allgemeiner are people who make things happen. We don't just stand at the sidelines and react, but proactive. This is the time. You know, people talk about the Holocaust. Where was the world? People were silent. So every aspect of this evening is honoring people who are not silent. Men and women of courage who will make their mark and are making their mark. So I salute, firstly, our wonderful team at the Allgemeiner. Let's give them a big hand. The editorial team, because today's media war with the media meltdown is as critical as the military war. Our honorees that we will soon recognize, each one of them another man or woman of courage. I want to make special mention of one of our longtime supporters, Rose Moskowitz, just passed away. Family has always been represented here. And I also want to make mention of another person who was always here, Joe and Debbie Aronow. This does not in any way preclude all the others, or those that are here, those that are not here physically, that are so much part of this success. So it's not just another gala, another event. It's actually about changing the world. Now, as the Jewish people are here thousands of years, there's a reason, because we were always proactive. And we pledge tonight, reaffirm our commitment to not be onlookers, but to make things happen. So thank you all for being here. Tremendous, tremendous honor. And may tonight's gala have its perpetual impact on each of us and on our respective spheres of influence, wherever that may be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and been so moved by everything I've heard tonight. I used to look at clips of girls hyperventilating in front of Elvis, screaming with adoration, some even fainting. And I have to say, I never understood that kind of fever. Then I walked alongside Douglas Murray in Tel Aviv. At a certain point, I wondered if the Israelis crying, hugging him, thanking him, knew something I didn't. Was this British-born, Eton-educated Gentile actually a descendant of King David himself? Forget Elvis. His was the sort of welcome normally reserved for war heroes. And in a sense, that is exactly what Douglas Murray is. It's true. Like King David, he is not carrying a gun, though he's pretty jacked. He's not smoking out Hamas from their terror tunnels in Gaza, nor is he hunting down Hezbollah in the hills of southern Lebanon, though he has been to all of those places, notebook in hand, as he has been to Ukraine and half a dozen other battlefields of the free world. You see, Douglas Murray is a warrior in a profoundly important battle, and one that has been invoked many times already tonight. And that is the battle for truth against lies in this unending war for this thing that we call the West. It is a war of ideas, of conviction, and of will, necessary to keep not just this republic, but our civilization. That was true of Douglas before October 7th, as anyone who has been reading his columns and his prophetic books, especially The Strange Death of Europe, for many years can attest. But it was after October 7th, when the well-heeled and the pedigreed threw their lot in with Hamas, that Douglas Murray grabbed his pen and his microphone, more powerful than the sword or even the slingshot, and leapt into the fray. He has not stopped fighting with his words and his wit, with his deep sense of history, and with his firm grasp of our present moral crisis. He has brought down, almost single-handedly, the moral monsters and the pseudo-intellectuals, the justifiers, the operatives, and the liars. Edward R. Murray famously said of Winston Churchill that he mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. Now, Douglas, of course, is British, which means he is physically unable to take a compliment, so I'm sure he's going to despise the comparison. But who in this room can hear that line and not think of Douglas Murray? Douglas, who has written of America as amazing not by accident, but by design. It is time he has written that we understood that design and paid due reverence to the designers themselves. Douglas, who has written of Israel and of the generation fighting this war, people will write books about this generation. And the best thing about it is that it should tell us that there is a better way. Anyone who feels down from spending too much time with people in America should go to Israel. And you will see that, among other things, the people who thought the next generation of Israelis just wanted to party were wrong. It turned out not to be an either-or thing. You can fight for your country and your people, and you can still dance. The weeks and months since October 7th, 2023 have been very dark ones for the Jewish people and for all of those who value life and the civilization that values life. They have been dark days for anyone who understands that Israel's war is our own, and that the people fighting that war are on the front line of the free world. Douglas has put it this way: Western civilization is based on the legacy of Athens and Jerusalem. What is being attempted by Israel's enemies right now is the philosophical and cultural equivalent of burning the libraries of Alexandria, and not in a metaphorical way, the real thing. So many of our supposed friends just do not get that. And so we have had to look hard over the past year and a half for the light. And we have found it. We have found it in Douglas Murray, the brightest beacon of all. How lucky are we to have a man of unbreakable courage who understands that he is fighting for something that is so fragile. How lucky are we that he takes that job so seriously in such a silly and unserious time. How lucky are we to have a champion of truth in what Auden called a low, dishonest decade. How lucky are we to have Douglas at this moment when the West's most insidious enemies are our neighbors, teach at our colleges, serve in our legislatures, and edit our most famous newspapers. Some might think that the tide has now shifted in favor of those who want to preserve the miracle of liberty. Maybe that's true. Or maybe the moment will be fleeting. We don't yet know. What we do know is that we can count on Douglas Murray. What we do know is that he will never, ever tremble, never waver, and never give up in the fight for the good and the true. And what we also know is that we are forever in his debt. Please join me in welcoming Douglas Murray.
Can I just first of all start by thanking the Allgemeine for this great honor and to thank all of you for being here, various people in the room who make my life possible and indeed endurable, and you all know who you are, so thank you. David mentioned the importance of truth in his remarks, and actually in her remarks just now, Barry echoed something that was on my mind. We didn't plan this, but it sometimes happens this way, that two people are thinking about the same thing, and she made a subtle, glancing reference there to W.H. Auden's great poem written in this great city, September the 1st, 1939. And it's often on my mind, as it is particularly perhaps tonight, because it's slightly embarrassing, as she said, for somebody who's British to receive an award or indeed a compliment. But I would just say that actually something that is on my mind often is not just that thing about the importance of truth, as David mentioned, but a line from that poem where Auden, sitting in this city, said, "All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie." And I suppose I think of that as one of my self-appointed tasks, to try to use what voice I have to undo the folded lie. Since I write a column for Barry about poetry and things worth remembering, perhaps I could just treat myself, if not you, to the final stanza of that great poem, by the way. This is what Auden wrote. He said, "Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies, yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame." Now, I wanted to mention just two things briefly in my remarks, and it goes back to that thing of truth. And I just wanted to mention two truths tonight. The first is that a number of people have already mentioned tonight something very important, which is an undeniable fact, which is that the events, the atrocities of October the 7th were the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The great Ruth Wise, emeritus professor at Harvard, and perhaps one of the very few people left who adds any luster to that ancient name, said in a podcast on the anniversary of October the 7th last year, she said there was something very interesting about that phrase. She said, it's right, and it's right to mention the victims, but here's what's interesting. Some people in our society, here in America and elsewhere, have had the courage, why it should require courage I don't know, but the courage to identify that fact, identify who the victims were. Yet what's almost entirely absent in our society is anyone with the courage to identify who the Nazis are, to say, why are they among us? Even at the worst times of radicalism in this country's past, we didn't see people at major institutions, Ivy League universities, distinguished guilds and trade unions and much more. We didn't see them siding with people who wanted the annihilation of the Jewish people. We didn't. What has gone wrong here in America and in the West? That there are people playing, I'm being generous, with the most dangerous evil imaginable. What does it say about us and the society which we've allowed to emerge? This is a deep challenge for us. But the second truth I wanted to mention was something which David also made mention of, which is the positive news. It's been, as Barry mentioned, my enormous honor to spend much of the last 15 months with the young men and women of the IDF, having an award called Warrior of Truth, as I say, is slightly embarrassing. I would like to return the favor in a way. The real warriors are very clear. We all know who they are. They are these remarkable young men and women, and we owe them everything, and the civilized world owes them everything. It's often said that the sign of getting old is that policemen look young, but I can tell you that when soldiers look like teenagers, you really know you're getting on a bit. I, in the past year, have had the privilege of being with the IDF in Israel, in Judea and Samaria, in Lebanon, and in Gaza. And I've seen these extraordinary people up close, firsthand. I wanted to just mention two groups of soldiers in particular. One is the soldiers of the Galani Brigade. It seems wrong perhaps to single out any division or company, but because if I kept going, I'd go on all night, and we don't have all night. I was with the Galani Brigade quite a lot in the past year, and on one occasion I was in Lebanon with them, and two things happened that made a particular impression on me that day. The first was a rather embarrassing one, which was that a young soldier in the battlefield recognized me and saluted me. And I was simultaneously deeply moved and deeply mortified. I said, but you're the one that deserves a salute. I'm just a writer. But later that night, the brigade returned to one of their headquarters in Binyamina, and a UAV drone came through the ceiling of the dining hall as they sat down to their dinner. And I was there as the wounded were being brought out, and my cameraman was helping tend to the wounds, the minor wounds. Four young men were killed, but I was speaking at one point to a young, he looked 12, 19-year-old soldier, and his friend recognized me, and we started talking, and this young soldier said in rather broken English, he said, you're a writer, you're a journalist? I said, yes. And he looked at me, he had blood on his neck, and he said, are you on our side? And I said, of course I'm on your side. And he said, but it seems to me that a lot of the world thinks we're the bad guys. And it just was heartbreaking. So I sat down with him and explained to him that although there are evil people in the world who do think that, all the good people are on his side. And what I learned from that was something which I wanted to just mention this evening, which is that if anything I do say or write gives any encouragement to anyone, they should know that it's very much a reciprocal thing. If you give encouragement to people, you also get encouragement back. And I always think that if I do give any encouragement to people, particularly to people like that young soldier, it's very much my honor to be able to do so. I just wanted to mention one other group of soldiers. Late last year, I was in a Sukkot tent with some friends in Jaffa and had just shaken the lula for the first time. I think it's right, the lula, yes. I hadn't done it before, and it was all explained to me, and I pretended to understand what was going on. But I did shake it over each shoulder and did all that, and I sat down, and my friends weren't on their phones, but I was, and I sat down, and I immediately got a photograph from a friend in Gaza saying, I think we've got Sinwar, and here's the body. And I kept it quiet from my friends, but about 3 hours later, everyone in Israel knew, so it was sort of hard to keep a secret there, as you know. Anyway, one of them said, how long have you known for, Douglas? I said, well, I shook that thing, And then Sinwar died. And I said I didn't like to say anything, but this is a really dangerous weapon, and you should make sure it doesn't get into the wrong hands. In any case, I tried to get to Rafah as soon as I could, and I managed it within about 24 hours. And it was my great honor to be there with some of the young men from the IDF's Infantry Commanders and Combat Training School, known as the Bizlach. And there were several really remarkable things about that day. One was hearing firsthand the battle they'd had the previous day, a couple of days earlier. And there were two things in particular that stood out to me. One was that it was members of this unit who had had this terrible, terrible tragedy happen the December before, where someone had, in this terrible situation, in this unimaginable battlefield that Hamas had created, had accidentally shot 3 hostages. And it was a nightmarish day, which, as ever, much of the international press misrepresented and presented it as if, you know, the Israelis are so evil they even killed their own hostages. It was disgusting, the international coverage. And as some of you will know, the unit in question went through very, very dark days. But the mother of one of the hostages who had been accidentally killed sent them a voice message after her son's death, saying, I don't blame you, I love you, I hold you close, and you have to remain strong. And in the middle of Rafah that day, one of the soldiers played me that they'd just got a message from the mother of that same soldier, and he played me the voice message. And here's what she said to them. She said, exactly 10 months ago, I sent you a message, and I told you to keep fighting, and not to think that you shot the kidnapped on purpose, because we need you safe and sound, and to keep taking care of yourselves. Today, you did the thing we were all waiting for. You saved the people of Israel. It was... But the second thing I wanted to say about that was another thing which has gave me enormous inspiration and encouragement. I realized that day that the young man who almost certainly fired the shot that killed the butcher of October the 7th was a 19-year-old member of the Bizlach. And here's a very, very interesting thing. That young man was not in uniform on October the 7th, 2023. In other words, by his actions, Yahya Sinwar created not just the generation, but the man who killed him. And this is a very, very great accomplishment and a great inspiration, I would suggest, to any sensible, sane young people worldwide. Young people in America and the rest of the West have lots of paths they could go down. They could go down that path of what I describe in my forthcoming book as the support of the death cults. They could side with the losers, with the Sinwars, with the Nasrallahs. But the cleverer ones among them might have noticed that those men all have something in common, which is that they've all gone to see their, in a fatal misreading, one 72-year-old virgin. A textual error, which is... But I just wanted to say that apologies to any 72-year-olds present, by the way. You all look great. But I just wanted to finish by saying, you know, back to this thing, encouragement is a two-way street. I've had enormous encouragement in the past year from seeing the young generation of Israelis, and have said many times, but repeat it now, that Any country in the world should be so lucky as to have young people like this. Any country in the world should be so lucky. We'll be very lucky in America and in Britain and other countries if we can produce young men and women of this caliber. And the final thing I just wanted to say, apart from thanking you and thanking Allgemeine again for this honor, is to say that, Barry slightly referred to it there earlier in her beautiful remarks, I've thought for some 25 years now on a phrase which the jihadists always use. They always use this phrase, whether it's Al-Qaeda when they attacked New York, this city, in 2001, or whether it's the Hamas terrorists who attacked Israel on October the 7th and many times since. They always say the same thing. They say, we love death more than you love life. And I've thought about that a lot over the years as I've lost friends to that death cult everywhere from Paris to Afghanistan. And I've often mulled on it. How can a society, how can a free society, a liberal, free, democratic society like ours, how can we face down such an enemy, a necrophilic death cult? And in the past 15 months, I've realized what the answer is. It's the answer that the IDF gives. It's the answer that the people of Israel have given, which is, there is nothing wrong with loving life this much. And if you wish to worship death, be our guest. We may even help you. But we will not apologize, not the Jewish people, not Gentiles, not anyone else. We will not apologize for loving life and for fighting for life. So I want to thank you, but I pass the award again to the young men and women of the IDF. These are the real warriors, but thank you for this honor.